Welcome to Silicon Valley Buzz, a TV show where we discuss happenings in this, the most fertile spot on the planet for new ideas. And I'm your host, Seth Shostak. The producer is Janet Wu. Well, tonight, women in technology, and what's the problem? While women are earning bachelor's degrees and even PhDs at a greater rate than men, the fraction of software engineers here in the Valley that are women is only about 1 in 5. So is this lack of opportunity? Lack of interest? Is there just some lack of fair play? Well, I'll be talking about that with my 3 guests, and they are Alicia Crank. Alicia, active in a myriad of community and political activities here in the South Bay, including being Director of Leadership Mountain View, and also the board chair of KMVT. Alicia, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Diana Bautista, sorry Diana, who's worked in government at both the local and the state level and is now an independent contractor focusing on special projects and social media. Diana, welcome to Silicon Valley Buzz.
Thank you.
And Marisa Chancellor, who's been a deputy division chief, did I get that right? At NASA Ames Research Center, and is now a senior director at Cisco. Marisa, thank you. So here's the deal. Women are overtaking men in getting college degrees, and they're on the verge of overtaking them and getting PhDs. In fact, some colleges are so worried about, the sex imbalance among their students, they're talking about affirmative action for males, which I find remarkable. But in technology, there seems to be a different story. 8 out of 10 software engineers is a man, and the percentage of tech firms founded by women is only around 3%. So what's going on here?
I mean, I don't know the complete answer around this, but I know throughout my career looking at high tech and even engineering, I think specifically one of the concerns was always around the pipeline of females going into technology and specifically into engineering itself. And we have a lot of women who are getting higher education degrees, but they're not always going into engineering specifically. And so I don't know the ratios, but I would suspect it's probably around 25%, which is kind of the slate of candidates we usually end up seeing for IT as well as engineering type of roles.
But is there something about engineering and technology? I mean, women get more degrees in biology, for example, than men do.
Yeah.
I think these days, certainly undergraduate degrees, and I think graduate degrees are very similar. And in fact, even in astronomy, which I happen to know something about, there are an enormous number of women that are getting degrees there. So what is it about engineering? Well, what is it about computer science?
I think a part of it could be the culture of where someone grows up. So I grew up in Detroit. So I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in the Midwest. And the concentration is for women to go to college, but it's usually for medicine or business. And so a lot of the friends that I grew up with who ended up graduating, going on to different things, went into the business field. I see some of them now going back to school to learn more about tech and maybe making that career change just because of the nature of the economy right now. But I think, at least from where I grew up, it wasn't mainly a focus for women to go into tech in that sense, but more of getting that business degree.
And it's a very overwhelming number of women who do enter with the intention of wanting to go into engineering, but once they're in class, there's maybe 2 women in the entire classroom. And so they're kind of almost wanting to leave that classroom for another field. There's also a lot of pressure it comes before they even go to college. STEM numbers, science, technology, engineering, and math is low once girls hit high school. So getting that pipeline that you went back to, it's not just graduating with that engineering degree, it's getting them involved at a very early age to start thinking about engineering, mathematics, and science.
Okay, what you're saying there, Diana, sounds like the problem with science and women, at least in the past. And the problem was that girls would hit the 5th grade or somewhere around there, and up to that point, they showed just as much interest in these fields as the guys did, as the boys. But then something happens, and they get discouraged one way or another from pursuing those fields. So that sounds like a cultural environment.
And it's not the past, it's happening right now. There's a big push here in Silicon Valley to get girls to start thinking about the STEMs, but it's not the past, it's actually happening right now.
Well, I have a daughter who is 16 now, but when she was in, I think, 5th or 6th grade, she and 3 of her other girlfriends had a robotics group, and they're one of probably out of maybe 20 groups there that were all female. The rest were almost all boys. And so you can see how early it does start, even in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
one of the people here at the station actually talked to one of the people at San Jose State. And she said, now, San Jose State, which has something like 30,000 students, it's a big school. 52% of them were female, 47 more or less percent were male. But nonetheless, the majority of the women were majoring in the traditional things that women have always majored in, humanities, 70% of them, even here in the Silicon Valley. So something's wrong. Well, maybe you have a personal story, Marisa. Maybe you do too, Diane. Because, I mean, you're in high tech and you work for Cisco Systems. That's
well, you know, I have to say, my degree was in computer science and math, and I'm trying to think about why I was so interested in math, and partly it's because my father was an engineering professor, and so at home he'd help me, you know, we do math problems on the chalkboard and things like that, and so I've always had this love of math, and I couldn't figure out how to apply it. And when computer science came, I'm old enough to know that there wasn't exactly a computer science degrees offered at the time. When that came around, I was like, oh, this is really great. And my class at the time was probably, I think, still maybe 15 to 20% female. And it's sort of been that way my whole career. And I guess I don't think of it as being different or unusual just because that's always the way it's been even through college. But as we think about who we're hiring, as we try to get more diversity, different types of leadership, different types of viewpoints, it is very concerning that we don't have the pipeline. And as well as when you think about, you know, when you go from job to job to job, people tend to travel in packs. Yeah. So you hire the Apple crowd or you hire the NASA crowd. And so you bring in the people that you know. And, you know, a lot of people that you know, if you've gone to school with other guys, tends to be other guys. So you always have to be more conscious about your slate of candidates to make sure it is more diverse than you may have thought it is.
But going through it yourself, did you have to have a certain kind of thick skin, a certain toughness to put up with the fact that it's always guys? This class is once again 80% guys. You know,
I just didn't know any differently. So I don't know if it was thick skin or not. I think that when I was working for the federal government, there was a very concerted effort around getting women in leadership there, and there was very open discussions about having certain quotas of women in leaders. And so when I did get promoted, the back of your mind, you always did question whether or not, well, was it on my merit or was it because I was female and I'm filling a slot that they needed? You know, since I've been at Cisco, it's not been the case at all because the leadership is very open and direct and you know, enthusiastic about this. And so I think it's a question of perspective in many cases.
We've been talking about factors that affect women as girls, factors that set in early. You've all mentioned that this happens early. I just want to sort of rule out the possibility there's some external factors that we're missing here that are important. To begin with, when it comes to, for example, women entrepreneurs in high tech, it's a very small percentage. Okay, 3% is a number I saw somewhere. Now, could it be that the venture capital community, which is largely men, just has this sort of maybe even unconscious bias toward guys? Because John Doerr, who is a very successful South Bay venture capitalist, said that, you know, his template for a successful guy to invest in, right there I said it, right? Successful person to invest in is, you know, some sort of nerdy white male guy who doesn't have any social life and probably dropped out of either Harvard or Stanford. I'm more or less quoting him there. And so, you know, he may not wish to be biased, but he has this picture of what's going to succeed. So that's built in. Is that a problem?
I almost think that there might be a situation where I think as women, we're planners. So when you think about being an entrepreneur and going to a venture capitalist, I feel like as a woman, we want to have the plan set. We want to have, you know, all, you know, your T's crossed, your I's dotted, plan A, plan B, plan C. And that takes a lot of time. Whereas I feel like a lot of the Silicon Valley guys that have come up have just said, I have an idea, just throw some money behind it and we'll figure it out as we go along.
So you mean they're maybe riskier, but on the other hand, it's the long shot might pay off kind of thing.
And I think that's almost been accepted as part of this is how these things go. I mean, Mountain View has a ton just in downtown of startups where it's, you know, a bunch of guys or guys and a couple of females, some that are in HR, some that are tech, that kind of start up and kind of hope that when they're going through their first phase of funding or second phase, that they're going to nail down exactly what it is that they want to do. And I think, at least I am inherently, I don't even want to approach going after funding or getting, you know, the green light for something unless I know that I have contingency plans. So I don't know if that's part of that. It's, you know, maybe that type of guy jumps in at, you know, minute one, whereas a female might wait until a month or a year because they want to have these things tighter in place.
I can see that. I mean, it's women definitely are more planners. We're less inclined to take that risk. But as far as the venture, I can't speak too much of the venture capitalist side, but I know with the new social media that's out there, more and more women are getting involved in that and are becoming more of the social bloggers. They're getting a lot more involved in being that voice. So they're not making the money, but they're kind of getting the visibility out there too. So it's kind of.
Well, Diana, what about social media? Is that going to be sort of a playing field leveler, do you think? I mean, is that going to help sort of redress this imbalance in technology?
I think so.
I mean, and if so, by the way, how does it do that?
There's so many forums out there where there's supporting girls in robotics. Women can talk about it. Girls are finding a safe place to communicate through social media. It's definitely leveling the field because they're having a different forum other than the classroom, other than the college experience. They're having a different way to express themselves. So I think it's definitely going to, more and more people are finding ideas on the internet. If you can read a blog about somebody's experience, and then out from that comes out an idea. So I think as the world's getting a little bit smaller here in Silicon Valley, the ideas are going to start emerging, and I think women have a voice in that.
And I think social media, less YouTube or any other form that has video attached to it where you can actually see the person. Social media opens it up to where you're not worried about how a person looks before they deliver the message. I mean, if you think back to, I mean, just traditional newscasts where they would staff or hire someone that was the newscaster based on looks. That's just how it is, you know. And so the person that was the voice in radio could have a further depth of being able to influence, and then you wouldn't see them until you're at an event or an appearance. And I'm like, oh, I didn't think this person looked like that, but they already have captured the audience with what they say.
Well, that's well known, and I think some women newscasters have actually sued the networks when they got fired at 31. You're too old for
so
this.
I think that's
now,
where social media kind of helps even that playing ground, because you're not so focused on how the person who's saying it looks.
Everyone's anonymous on the internet.
It's kind of more that not so
good and bad.
So good and bad.
Yeah, so now you're more focused on hopefully the good message or the positive message, as opposed to who's saying it and what they look like.
Could that also be working, say, for fifth grade girls at that critical point where they might move away from science and technology simply because they want to be popular, perhaps, and there's this very long-standing idea. It's a bias. It's a cultural bias that women should not be too smart and not be too scientifically literate or technically inclined, and so they get away from it just because they want to be popular. I mean,
I was never that kid.
All right, good. I hope that they're not that kid anymore. Actually, our intrepid KMVT staff has gone out to a local high-tech firm to actually interview a woman entrepreneur. One of the, she's in the minority here, but and talk to her about what she has to do to stay successful. And I'm hoping we can take a look at that video now.
Right.
It was.
Let's check it out.
My name is Cindy Cow. I've lived and worked in Silicon Valley for about 16 years. I came here when I was in high school, to Monte Vista High School, and then went away for college, but then returned because I studied engineering, so it was a natural move back here. I pretty much grew up at Xilinx, which is an FPGA semiconductor company. After that is when I decided to start my own company, Mobile Snap. And since then, after doing that, I'm now at Accelerator. So Mobile Snap is basically a company that focuses on an app product as well as a service arm of the business. When we first started out, we had our office in a complex that was filled with startups. They basically rented out cubes. And through that, we got to meet a lot of people in the startup business. And out of all the people I met one other female. My advice for women who want to get into the startup business is to get some thick skin. It's tough. It's really a male-dominated place. There's not a whole lot of space for work-life balance. So you really have to have thick skin, be able to tough it out, but also be nimble and flexible and ready to change at any given moment.
Well, there you have it.
Yeah.
But those are the words of a survivor.
Right.
And she said that surviving wasn't entirely trivial.
No, not at all.
But we've talked a little bit about the difficulties that women face, or at least, you know, some of the impediments to having them go into technology. But there are also studies that show that, you know, we're really missing out here. I mean, when I say we, the society's missing out because apparently they bring a lot to the table. And, apparently venture-backed startups run by women require, on average, 40% less capital than those run by men. And they produce better returns, too.
Because we're planners.
Is that the answer?
It goes back because we're planners. We're already thinking about, again, option A, option B, and option C. We're thinking it out. We're not waiting to see what's going to happen once we get through the first step. We plan.
If I were a venture capitalist, I would look at that and I'd say, you know, forget the guys altogether. I mean, I can do so much better if I only invest in women. And then, of course, you know, approaches to problems. You know, men have this sort of engineering solution to all problems, right? We'll fix this by putting in a widget that'll solve the problem. And women see this in terms of the interaction with the user, or they have a different approach, which I would think would be extremely beneficial in any product that you're selling, you know, to the public. So there are all these advantages, and yet we don't seem to be taking advantage of them by getting more women in.
Which is interesting. I mean, it should be by the numbers. You look at the numbers, and why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, because
but they're not out there, is what we're hearing. I mean, they're not out there.
Yeah, but I think, you know, for venture capitalists, they would definitely want to look at the return on their investment and say, where am I going to get the most return? And perhaps it goes back to this sort of instantaneous society that we live in terms of wanting instant rewards versus maybe waiting a bit, but having a longer sustaining set of rewards and value that's being delivered. And, you know, I think, I'm not a venture capitalist, so it's hard for me to speak for on their behalf, but it'd be interesting to ask them specifically, you know, would you look for longer sustaining value versus sort of get in and get out quickly? What makes the difference?
Well, Marisa, you actually work in a high-tech firm here in the Valley,
Yes.
a big one.
Yes.
So what fraction of the you know, technical people are women, roughly?
I think the last time I looked is probably around 25%.
Okay,
yeah.
so maybe a little bit better than the average, but, you know, not strikingly different. And why don't you have more?
It's a large part of Cisco is engineering. So, you know, if I think about a third of the companies is engineering, a third of the company is sales, and the third is probably, you know, the support other types of organizations, HR, finance. And engineering will tend to skew towards, you know, male. I think the supporting organizations are probably more half and half, and sales is probably more half and half. I don't really know the exact numbers, but it probably tends that way. And I think, once again, it's back to the pipeline of engineers and people who are interested in going into that field.
Yeah, well, I don't have the feeling that if you were presented with equally qualified men and women that you would somehow discriminate against the women in the engineering staff.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't. So you're just confronted with the fact there just aren't as many candidates applying for those positions that are women, right?
Yeah, I think you have to take a more concerted effort overall. I mean, speaking in general in terms of different companies, especially engineering companies, that you have to make a more concerted effort. And so part of it is through bringing in interns with, once again, a diverse slate of candidates, bring in new college grads, sort of getting that next generation of people interested across the board.
Do you send recruiters out to, for example,
Absolutely.
women's schools and stuff like that?
Yep.
You do.
We have a full recruiting staff.
Let me ask the other two. Okay, she would hire them if they would show up.
Okay.
So how do we get more women to study engineering?
If I can't, what we're seeing a lot of in the Valley is that kids, especially in the more underserved areas, don't know what's behind those big buildings. And they see the buildings and they don't know what goes on inside the Yahoo. Like, they know what Yahoo is, but they don't know the behind the scenes. So I think it's getting those kids to know what the jobs are. I mean, there's jobs today that parents don't even know about that are here now. So it's educating those kids to think bigger than what they see. And you don't see an engineer. You don't see the people working with the little gadgets. So it's getting the kids to start thinking about those jobs, what it takes to get those jobs, and then getting them on that track. And it starts early. It starts in the 4th grade. I knew what I thought I knew what I wanted to be when I was in the 6th grade. So it's just getting that exposure to them that that we're working on in the Valley.
So it sounds like heroes, role models. You need role models for young girls.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think also to what she was saying too is showing that these entities are actually companies. They're actual places that you go to work. Anytime someone visits me from not in California, comes out here, and again, they're intelligent people, male or female, and when we drive by the Google complex, it's like, oh, I never think of Google as a place. It's a website. It's a place that you go to. And I think they felt the same way about the, Yahoo or Facebook. It's not this place that you go to work. It's just there. And it's this thing that I go to and use. So I think just simplifying that process of going, this is a place that functions with people. And they need people there to make this continue to go. There are people behind why you can go and Google, French fries and get, whatever you're going to get.
I have to say, and this is anecdotal, but it's my opinion that kids get interested in something somewhere between the ages of 8 and 11. I did, and a lot of that can be influenced by somebody who just comes to the school and talks to the kids. I remember, a couple of people came to our school, and one guy just said electronics. That's all I remember about what he said. But I remember that better than the rest of what was told me by my teacher the entire year, right? When you're in that age range, you can be influenced. Do we have any outreach programs to reach young kids and tell them, hey, engineering, it's fun?
There are. Silicon Valley Leadership Group. I don't work for them, but I know that they do really great stuff. And they recently had a day where they had women from the Valley go to schools and talk to young girls about what they do. And a lot of them were in the software industry. There's some of them were CEOs. They talked about their personal issues and what they had to overcome. So there's Silicon Valley Leadership has done them. Silicon Valley Education Foundation has had a lot of great forums where they try and bring them to the schools. I'm on the board of Girls for a Change and the Boys and Girls Club Silicon Valley, and we're always looking for role models to go to talk to the kids. So it's happening here in the Valley. It's just a little bit, there's just not that. We're always looking for more.
Yeah.
Did you ever bring school kids to Cisco?
Well, we always have the Take Your Kids to Work Day, which was, really kind of fun to see the kids, but also for them to interact with our CEO and other leaders in the company. And you'd see them running around. But, it's sort of, bringing somebody in for a day when it's kind of very produced, it's not going to give them necessarily a sense. I know when I brought my daughter to work, she was just more excited about the cafeteria than anything else. But she's definitely very much into the sciences. I think it does take a more active involvement at the school level in the communities themselves. I know even the Girl Scout organizations and other organizations have an opportunity to bring in, we just have a plethora of great women leaders, both in technology and not in technology here in the Valley. So there's a lot of opportunities that can happen.
Well, since you have a daughter, I mean, have you done anything very
two.
Even better? Have you done deliberate things to get them interested in science, or do you just say whatever they want to do, they do?
A couple opportunities, both between myself and my father. For example, my father, as an engineer, whenever my kids would go up to visit my parents in Davis, there was a bridge being built over the Feather River. So over a period of 6 months, he kept taking my oldest daughter to see the progress in the bridge, and there's pictures of her in her hard hat, and just kind of get an engineering perspective. And sadly, she's not an engineer, but my younger daughter, who is very interested in having these types of conversations, doing experiments and whatnot. I think being with somebody who has that passion for technology, for science, really allows them to start to explore and ask questions And, you know, answer, sadly, you know, I've forgotten most of the things I've learned in college already, so I'm not much help to her at times. But I think that she's exposed to a lot of my friends who have deep science backgrounds. You know, I have a friend who's a PhD in biology who she can go to for her bio questions and things like that. So there's a lot of people around here who, at least my children, have a lot of exposure to, or opportunity to have exposure to.
Well, I think that brings up a great point, though, is that I think a lot of it has to do with relationship building. It's about building those relationships with my new friend now at Cisco and figuring out ways to go, okay, now that I know that this person is there, when the opportunity arises to try to make something happen there, can I reach out to Marisa and say, hey, is there something that we can do together, you know, and kind of put all these things together and make something happen. So I think the resources are there, but there has to be another focus on doing that level of relationship building between the folks at these various organizations to make that happen.
I have to say that in science, and it's, you know, the organizations in Washington, that, like the National Science Foundation, National Academy of Sciences and so forth, that, you know, try to figure out what gets kids interested in science. And they're not so much looking at the sex differences, just, you know, kids in general. And one thing that seems to be very effective are movies and television shows, to be honest. It's only entertainment, but it has that emotional content. And you go see a movie that it contains some science, and, you know, kids get interested. They think that's romantic. Maybe that's what we need. We need a geekette movie.
Silicon Valley, the movie?
It's possible. I've met so many 12-year-olds who now want to be forensic scientists, and all because of CSI.
Exactly, exactly. Well, one last very provocative question. How serious is this problem? Is it just something to discuss, you know, at a cocktail party, or is it something we should be really worried about and focusing a lot of energy on?
I think it's serious. I mean, I think it's serious not just for girls and women, but I think it's also serious for, I think, us as a nation in terms of getting more science, technology, engineering interests at, across the board, boys, girls, men, women.
Absolutely. It's definitely serious, and the numbers of the U.S. falling behind, what is it, like Turkey now, and just emerging countries coming out, and the U.S. is going down and down. So it's definitely an issue that needs to be talked about more out in the public with your teachers, with concerned parents. It's a growing problem.
And business leaders have to get more involved in it, because as our education budgets get cut more and more and more every year, without those partnerships, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me, I agree with you obviously, but I think it's self-evident that you cannot be a competitive country if you sort of write off half the population, say, well, they're not going to participate in technology.
Right.
Well, I hope to see the day when high tech doesn't just mean guy tech. After all, as I said, technology's fun. Well, I want to thank my guests, Alicia Crank and Diana Bautista and Marisa Chancellor. Also, thanks to our tech-savvy and invariably competent KMVT staff, our producer, Janet Wu, who I know, by the way, is a woman.
Yes.
I'm Seth Shostak, inviting you to join us every month for Silicon Valley Buzz. Good night.